Tonight on KPBS Evening Edition, making room at City Hall.
I think it says, the fact that City Hall is right here, they're not afraid to have our shelter right here in one of the buildings that's right next to the City Hall. So I think it says a lot of positive things, frankly.
A new shelter for single women and families is on the move. How Father Joe's is using part of the City Hall concourse as a temporary fix. And their goal is to find the hardest reached people. A new census outreach in San Diego and Imperial counties.
Everything was just covered in mouse, rodent droppings, urine.
A local family shares their complaints about housing at Camp Pendleton and the slow response from the military. And it's a preview of what we might see at Comic-Con. WonderCon wraps up its weekend in Anaheim. We'll show you some of the highlights from this year's show. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening. It's Monday, April 1st. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. Dozens of homeless families are temporarily moving into Golden Hall in downtown San Diego today. That's because the large tent shelter they've been living in is being taken down. KPBS reporter Susan Murphy says it's part of a plan to build new permanent housing.
Nearly 70 children and their parents are moving into the second floor of Golden Hall for 3 months. They'll sleep in large rooms filled with 150 metal-framed bunk beds, and they'll be offered an array of services. Deacon Jim Vargas is CEO of Father Joe's Villages, the region's largest homeless service provider, which will manage the shelter.
They will have showers. They will have 3 full hot meals a day provided by our staff. And of course, our employment center and our navigation center helping them into housing, because at the end of the day, it's all about getting them into housing.
Residential staff will be here 24/7.
They'll also receive therapeutic childcare, health care, psychiatry, addiction treatment, and employment training. Paul DeLezio is Director of Coordinated Services with Father Joe's Villages. He oversees the care of the residents. He says the children are resilient and will likely adapt easily to their new environment.
But once you get older, then it becomes, the ego starts to come in and you start getting embarrassed about things. But for the younger kids, they're really great with it.
Golden Hall is a hub of activity located next to the Civic Theater, where Broadway shows tour, and City Hall, where San Diego's elected leaders are scrambling in their offices and boardrooms to combat the 4th worst homeless crisis in the nation. Now, many of the people they're working to help will be their neighbors, but thousands more remain on the streets. Vargas says his waiting list has grown to 200 names. He says that's why it's so essential to build more permanent housing, like the 14-story building he's constructing in place of the tent shelter at Father Joe's Villages.
And that's going to be 407 units. It's going to take about 550 people off the streets. Can you imagine? I mean, that's a big deal.
Susan Murphy, KPBS News.
The homeless families will move back into the tent shelter in July after it's moved to a new location in East Village. Congress is shining a light on problems with private military housing. KPBS military reporter Steve Walsh spoke with a Camp Pendleton mom who shares her story.
Originally, Leslie Tomlinson was excited to move into private on-base housing on Camp Pendleton. Then in 2017, she remembers waking up when she heard her 2-year-old daughter crying.
And I walked over to the hallway and I turned the switch on in the hallway, and there was tons of mice just running down my hallway. You could see them coming out of the rooms, just scampering down the halls.
Her husband, a Marine, was deployed. Together they have 4 children, all of them younger than high school age. The next morning,
everything was just covered in mouse, rodent droppings, urine.
She took pictures. She even kept the contents of the vacuum. She says Lincoln Housing, which owns all of the private on-base housing, sent an exterminator, but the mice kept coming. This happened in March 2017. They had to stay through the long, hot summer. She asked a representative from Lincoln Housing to move them somewhere else on the base.
Because it was so bad, and she said that we couldn't move. There was nowhere to move us to.
She contacted the local health department, who said they couldn't help her because she was living on base.
I have all these pictures. I'm literally living pretty much in an uninhabitable home quite literally, like if they would have come, they would have pretty much condemned the home. And you're telling me you can't help me. And so that was a huge blow for me.
That's when she found out that military families have very little leverage over the private companies that run military housing. Congress is now debating a tenant's bill of rights. Lincoln finally found a replacement home in October 2017 after she started telling people about her case on social media. Still, speaking out isn't easy. We tried over several days to get an on-camera interview with both Lincoln and Camp Pendleton. KPBS was even denied access to Tomlinson's home all the way up until the time of our interview.
Can we come on base now?
Lincoln Military Housing issued a statement from CEO Jarl Bliss, which says in part, "We welcome and encourage military families to raise issues about our housing, and we regret when even one family is dissatisfied with our performance," adding, "We are also seeking input from residents and the Navy and are committed to improving the living experience in all of our base housing." Steve Walsh, KPBS News.
The Navy and Marines say they will inspect any home at the request of the tenant. They've set a deadline of April 15th. 2 Marines died over the weekend in Arizona when their helicopter crashed there. The Marine Corps says the crash happened Saturday night at its air station in Yuma. This is military video of the type of helicopter that was involved. The Marines say the helicopter was being used for training purposes. Local mayors and business leaders are in Mexico tonight. It's part of a yearly trip to talk trade, immigration, and the environment along the border. Mayor Kevin Faulconer is there, along with the mayors of Imperial Beach, Chula Vista, National City, and Encinitas. During an event in Mexico City, Mayor Faulconer expressed his support for the new United States-Mexico-Canada agreement.
So many of our industries work together, and that's why we absolutely essential to have this ratified both in the United States and Mexico.
NAFTA remains in effect until the USMCA is ratified. That's expected to happen sometime next year. In Washington, the Trump administration is continuing its focus on the southern border. It's expanding plans to reassign border inspectors. The Department of Homeland Security now says 2,000 staff will be moved. Last week, that number was 750. The focus is on the El Paso border crossing, which has seen an increase in arrivals. Many of them are families seeking asylum. There is no information yet on how the reassignments will affect the San Ysidro port of entry. A question about citizenship is hanging over the 2020 census, which will begin 1 year from today. Locally, a group known as Count Me 2020 launched its outreach campaign today in Logan Heights. Dozens of community groups will try to find those who are considered hard to count. The Trump administration wants to include a census question about citizenship, which is being challenged in court. Critics say it will hurt participation.
You know, the simple reality is we have a president who's trying to sow seeds of hatred and division to inflame his own political rhetorical game. But in San Diego County, we will reject this approach. In San Diego County, we will show that we welcome our diversity, we embrace our diversity, we embrace all people from all walks of life, and we will stand together as a community to make sure that all are counted.
I'm the regional program manager for San Diego, and we can't forget Imperial County as well. And these 2 counties represent the 2nd largest hard to count cities in the country. I'm not saying the state, in the country. So we do have our work cut out for us.
Count Me 2020 is led by the United Way and Sandag. The coalition has received more than $3 million in state funding for its outreach work. Beginning today, records about police misconduct and use of force are set to be released. KPBS investigative reporter Claire Tragesser explains what that means for transparency.
It means the public should now be allowed to see past records of police shootings, use of force, and sexual assault. A new state law called for the release of these records, but local police unions sued to try to block that release. A judge ruled against the unions, but gave them until the end of March to appeal. Matthew Hallgren, an attorney involved in the case, says it appears that hasn't happened.
It appears that the unions have not sought or obtained relief from the Court of Appeal. So the agencies should now release their records relating to pre-2019 conduct and incidents.
Just because the stay is now lifted does not mean the records will be immediately released. Some local police departments have sent letters to KPBS saying it will take time to review and redact records. Claire Tregesser, KPBS News.
The lawyer for the police unions did not return a request for comment on whether the unions plan to file an appeal. California's first partner is partnering with lawmakers and the tech industry to close the pay gap. Jennifer Gov Newsom was in Sacramento today to promote Equal Pay California. It's her first major awareness campaign since Governor Gavin Newsom took office. California political leaders say despite new pay equity laws, women still make 89 cents for every dollar earned by a man.
Share our campaign and help us reach pay equity in California, because together we can uplift California women and ensure a more equitable future for all.
Women's paychecks have to reflect the hard work and the true value of our work. Our work is equally valuable and needs to be paid as such.
Companies that sign on to the Equal Pay California agree to conduct annual audits of their own gender pay gaps. So far, 13 companies have joined. That includes large tech companies like Apple, Airbnb, and Square. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris is California's first Surgeon General. She's a pediatrician by training, and her work focused on how traumatic events in childhood could lead to poor health later in life. KQED Newsroom's Thuy Vu spoke to her about her work.
Well, good to have you back. We've had you on our program before talking about the impact of toxic stress on children. Can you explain the difference between normal stress and toxic stress?
Yeah, so when we talk about stress, normal stress is the stuff that we experience, and it can even be pretty stressful experiences, but with safe, stable, and nurturing relationships, buffering relationships, that our bodies recover from them. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about toxic stress, we're talking about, it's actually not the stressor, it's the body's stress response. And it's what happens when kids in particular are exposed to high doses of adversity without those adequate buffering systems.
Some pediatricians, though, take issue with the term toxic stress because they feel like it implies the parents created these toxic conditions and could perhaps shame them into not getting help. What would you say to those doctors?
Oh, my goodness. I think that what we recognize is that when kids are exposed to high dose of adversity and they, for some reason, aren't getting that buffering caregiving system, usually it's because perhaps the parent or the caregiver themselves has experienced significant adversity in their childhood. And what we see is that these things tend to be handed down from generation to generation. So what I would say is that really when we talk about the term toxic stress, we're talking about the biological response, and that's not about blame or shame, and that doesn't help. We're talking about families who need our support.
So then, clinically, what can you do to help the children who suffer from toxic stress?
Yeah, well, what the science tells us is actually pretty clear. Two things. Number one, early detection and early intervention improves outcomes. And things like healthy relationships, mental health treatment, exercise, nutrition, sleep, even mindfulness like meditation actually help to calm down the biological stress response and can improve health outcomes.
And besides, well, let me ask you one more question about toxic stress, because California already has a law that will require all children on the state's Medicaid program to receive trauma screenings starting next year. As Surgeon General, what else do you plan to do to further tackle this issue?
Well, I think one of the big reasons why I was appointed to be Surgeon General, and especially now, is that we do see that our state is not only taking bold strides in terms of this new legislation, but in addition putting significant investments behind the infrastructure that we need to be able to implement that. And in the role of Surgeon General, I get to not only advise the administration, but also communicate with the public about why this is so important and what we can do about it.
And do you think that it really is a public health crisis and there's some sort of national campaign needed on this?
So this is funny. I actually looked this up when I took this role of Surgeon General because I, want to do everything by the book. And if you look at the CDC definition of a public health crisis, it's something that affects a lot of people. And adverse childhood experiences affect 2/3 of Californians, right?
Wow.
In fact, 16% of Californians have 4 or more of the traditional 10 adverse childhood experiences. And the effects are significant. We're talking about, for someone who has 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, double the risk for heart disease, double the risk for cancer, 2.5 times the risk of stroke, triple the risk of chronic lung disease, right?
So a little bit of prevention goes a long way.
Yeah.
Besides focusing on children's health, what will be some of your other priorities as Surgeon General?
Yeah, so one thing is that toxic stress can affect across the life course. And so that'll be one place, is figuring out how all of our systems can address this issue. But in addition, it's really around looking at healthy starts for every child, early childhood, and health equity, I think, is a really key issue that we also want to address, because making sure that every community has access to excellent outcomes is just, it's the right thing to do.
It's smart policy.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, congratulations on your new post. We wish you all the best in your new role.
Thank you.
You can see more of this interview at kqed.org. It's expected to stay warm this week in San Diego. Erin Calandra has tonight's forecast.
Well, happy Monday to you. I hope you had a nice day. Hey, it is warm around here. Temperatures in the 80s. That's way above average. We should be at 66 this time of year for our average high. So we are certainly under a warm pattern. It's because we have an offshore flow. So that's going to be changing. The winds are going to be shifting. And starting tomorrow, those temperatures will tumble back to a normal range. Now, notice to the north of us, there's a storm moving in. It's going to stay to the north. It's going to help change our winds, and we're going to stay dry through that. But there's another storm moving in that could bring us some showers overnight tomorrow. So for tonight, we're dry, 58 degrees, increasing clouds again as that onshore flow starts. And Oceanside will reach 48. El Cajon at 53 and Mount Laguna reaching 43 for the low. Tomorrow will be another warm day, still above average, but notice to the north, even some snow expected for those higher elevations and a couple of showers, but staying north of Los Angeles. So we'll see some sunshine. Oceanside 67, San Diego down to 68 degrees. Now that is average. Chula Vista reaching 67 and Borrego Springs in the 80s. It's going to be sunny and bright. Now late week, we have another storm coming in to the north, but this one's going to be powerful. We do expect it to reach further to the south. With that, there will be a chance of seeing some showers throughout the weekend. Right now, we're calling it dry, but don't be surprised if that forecast changes. So throughout the week, we'll see some sunshine, getting a bit cooler and cloudier toward the end of the week. Saturday, we'll reach 68 degrees. Inland, we'll see our temperatures get a bit cooler. By Thursday, we're down to 66. It's going to be dry and sunny, though, and warming up to 71 degrees for Saturday. And then in the deserts, expected to stay dry and sunny. A few clouds around. Our temperatures will be going from the 80s to the 70s, right back up to the 80s by Friday. And in the mountains, we're in the 50s. Pretty cool pattern. Overnights are still in the 30s, but we will see some sunshine. Certainly conditions for a jacket. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra. Back to you.
WonderCon just wrapped up in Anaheim. The pop culture convention is kind of like the baby sister of Comic-Con International, which of course takes place here in San Diego every summer. It's smaller, easier to access, and put on by the same organizers. Now, our KPBS arts reporter Beth Accomando, she attended the convention and she joins us now to tell us more about what we all missed and what we could possibly learn.
Sure.
So Beth, what's the biggest difference between Comic-Con and WonderCon?
WonderCon started in San Francisco, and even when it moved to Anaheim, it kept this kind of laid-back vibe to it. So it's a little bit smaller than Comic-Con, and there's not as many lines. The space feels kind of more spread out. You don't feel like you're fighting the crowds as much. So it's maintained this kind of more casual, vacation-like convention.
And the reputation that Comic-Con has is that you basically have to try a year in advance to maybe get tickets, and even then, it's still a gamble. What's it like to get tickets to WonderCon?
You can buy tickets up to, I think there were still tickets available about 2 weeks before the convention started, and 3-day passes did sell out, but not until like a few weeks before. So you don't have to be like on your computer with, you know, your finger poised on the keyboard to get into it. This year they had an estimated like 66,000, which is about half the size of Comic-Con.
And what was the theme this year?
Well, this is the 80th birthday of Batman. So there was a celebration for Batman. DC brought a cake. There was a panel where you could get Batman cupcakes. There was a Legal Geeks panel exploring all these legal questions of Batman and deputizing a vigilante crime fighter into the police force. So there was a big celebration sense of Batman, the superhero in the DC comic.
So I would imagine that was probably a popular panel. Any other excitement happening?
Yeah, so Jordan Peele is rebooting Twilight Zone as a series, and that had a great panel. Also, kind of the changing landscape of film distribution and series distribution is YouTube had an original series called Cobra Kai, which is visiting the characters of Karate Kid 20 years later. And so there was a lot of fun stuff going on up there.
And Comic-Con has some challenges here in San Diego with the convention center basically outgrowing the convention center with no immediate plans to expand the convention center. What's the situation with WonderCon in their space?
Sure. They've added a new building. I think last year they brought it in. So WonderCon still has space to expand there. So it's been growing. The layout of the convention center is such that there's a nice big fountains and patio space out in front, which allows for some overflow from the convention floor to go to, and there's a lot of food trucks. So there's a lot more room for them to expand.
So obviously Comic-Con has been around for a lot longer than WonderCon, but could San Diego learn anything from the way Anaheim puts on this convention?
I think one of the key things they could learn is hotels are a lot easier to get in Anaheim. They're a lot cheaper. They're right next to the convention center. Comic-Con, which is a nonprofit organization, doesn't have any control over the hotels in San Diego. And it would be nice if the hotels down here made it a little easier for fans to attend the convention. So one of the things Comic-Con is doing, because they're kind of out of space at the convention center, they are going to be opening the Comic-Con Museum. And their hope is that by offering this Comic-Con experience all year long, that people who get shut out of the convention can experience some of the things you would experience there at the museum.
And when does the museum officially open?
The museum is currently open on a certain level. They do an event like maybe once a month that's very popular. The plan is to close it down completely at the end of the year for renovations, and that the renovations may take a year to 18 months to complete. So hopefully in the not too distant future.
Well, it sounds like a whole lot of fun. Beth Accomando, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'm John Yang. Tonight on the NewsHour, President Trump says he wants to cut aid to 3 Latin American countries, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
More jobs are coming to San Diego City Heights community. KPBS reporter Taryn Minto says the opportunities are for young people who lack work experience.
The nonprofit City Heights Coffee House will add 30 employees to its current staff of 5. The expansion is part of a pilot program that gives youth job experience and leads to internships that match their career goals. Coffee House co-founder Sterling Tran says the Career Launch Academy fits her organization's mission to hire youth who face employment barriers and provide them with life skills training.
I'm just excited to see them dream and figure out what they want to do and just, help them do that. And it's exciting to see people proud of themselves and achieve things that they might not have thought were possible.
The 2-month initiative is in collaboration with the San Diego Workforce Partnership. Taryn Mento, KPBS News.
Here's a recap of tonight's top stories. Father Joe's Villages is moving one of its shelters into the City Hall concourse. The city agreed to reaccommodate those who were staying in a shelter for single women and families. Father Joe's expects to find a new location this summer. The current shelter is being remodeled into affordable housing. A group of local mayors are in Mexico City tonight. They're taking part in an annual trip organized by the Regional Chamber of Commerce. San Diego Mayor Kevin Faulconer talked today about cross-border trade and his support for the new trade agreement involving the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. And the 2020 census begins 1 year from today. Locally, a group known as Count Me 2020 is starting an outreach campaign in Logan Heights. Dozens of communities are working together to help people in hard-to-count areas take part. Now here's a look at what we're working on for tomorrow in the KPBS newsroom. On Morning Edition, mysterious odors at SDSU led to people getting sick and the relocation of classes. We'll tell you how the university is addressing the issue. And on Midday Edition, advice for new pet owners. The San Diego Humane Society's president and CEO shares his tips on how to care for pets at home. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.